So I got into painting a long time ago when I was a kid. My dad got me into it, I guess. And as was quite popular with kids in the 90s, I got into painting Warhammer, which is a tabletop miniature game where everyone has to paint their own army and then you pit these armies against each other. So as with most teenage hobbies, that kind of died out after a few years, and I haven't painted since. And then recently, this year, when the pandemic hit, I had a abundance of time, and nostalgia was making me think back to some of these old hobbies, and particularly since it's a nice creative hobby, painted. And quite recently, I've started playing board games with some of my friends more regularly in Helsinki, and I started to notice that a lot of these board games with very heavily focused on miniatures, and they come in this boring grey, just waiting to be painted. They're actually designed really with painters in mind. So I decided to, splash out and get one and give it a try. And then just slowly building up from there. And then, as you can see behind, I have the paint collection just slowly grows and gets bigger every time you need a new colour of paint. And before you know it, you've taken over the kitchen table and your girlfriend needs to find somewhere else to work. Zombicide, which is it's made by a company called Simon, which actually they started off as a website where people would rate their minis, and you'd upload a photo of your painting and then upvote or downvote it. But then they started expanding through Kickstarter and making their own board games, and I think it launched in 2013 or so. But it was hugely popular because of both the mechanics and all the great miniatures you get to paint. So there's a huge target audience for those people that painted as kids in the 90s and then getting back into it later in life. And it really hits the mark with those kind of people, which is exactly where I fall in. So in the zombie games, you have these big, scary zombies, and in some of the other ones you have, in more fantasy kind of games, you have minotaurs and cyclops, and so those are definitely the most fun. You get to add lots of blood and gore, and here, for example, this is one of the big bad zombies. This is an abomination, and as you can see, he's a bit more interesting than just painting a guy holding a sword or something like that. But for me, if you have these unique miniatures, so the unique ones are when you only have one mold of a mini. So it's often a character, or if there's an enemy that's a particularly special one, it will be a unique one. And these ones nearly always come with a concept art, whether it's a picture in the game manual or something on the website, or often they have a card. It's a game anyway. So for those, I always try and follow them as closely to the picture as possible. Not only so it's easily recognizable when you're playing the game, but also it's a fun challenge trying to recreate the actual colors you can see. And sometimes they can have difficult patterns, especially clothes. If someone has a t-shirt on with a design, and it helps to push you in areas where otherwise you might get a bit lazy, and you might just say, I'll just give him a plain black t-shirt. But if the picture has a dragon on it, then you got to draw a dragon, right? Or else it's not the same model. But then there's still plenty of these sort of more mundane enemies where you might have 3 or 4 of the same sculpt in the box. And for these ones, obviously, just painting them all the same, if you have loads of these, then it can start looking a bit samey. So that's a good opportunity to have free reign and sort of come up with your own ideas and colour schemes. And certainly for my girlfriend, when I ask her to give me advice on colours, and she quite enjoys choosing the clothes and what colour clothes the different characters should have. So it's nice to get involved in that way. So these tiles are a good example of some of the different kind of techniques you can get. It's not just as simple as just using paint. For example, this one, you have this sort of weathered industrial look. And it has like this powder and to look like dust. So to create this effect, you use pigment. So this is just raw coloured pigment, same stuff that you get mixed with different paints, just in its powder form. And you would mix this with, this is just an alcohol binder. So you mix that together and you get like a nice slush. And because this is alcohol, it dries off quickly. So then you can create these dried powdered effects. You also use some oil paints. Generally, oil paints aren't so good for miniatures because it takes a long time to dry. But it's great for doing weathering effects. So making things look old and rusted. So you can smear it around in the cracks and you have plenty of time to work it around before it dries. So those are useful tools. Another one, using graphite pencils. So a lot of metal to create like a chipped effect, or where the paint's been worn down. You can use these graphite pencils to actually draw on top of the paint to create various effects. And then, for example, this one here, to create like a moss effect on the wood. There's a special kind of paint that's an actual moss deposits, and this dries in a special way so you can recreate the moss look. But there's countless types of special paints to achieve whatever kind of effect you can imagine, be it rust or slime or wood or moss or whatever you can think of, really. It's one of these moods you get into where you're very focused on what you're doing, but it doesn't take up your full attention. So I quite often, it's a good opportunity to listen to podcasts because you can just still focus on a conversation enough while still paying attention to what you're doing. And each time you sit down with a different miniature, it's almost like a puzzle, trying to work out how to bring out all the details and the right colours and the shading. And it's very rewarding seeing it grow and expand, not only as you get better at painting and having that satisfaction of seeing you progress and trying out new techniques and seeing those working, but also just in the actual miniature, starting with something that's completely colourless and grey with no life to it, and then bringing out these details, and you discover details you never even noticed in the model, and they become a lot more visible afterwards. So the whole process is just seeing something. It's like bringing life into models. So it's very rewarding in that sense. It's therapeutic. Okay, well, if you're interested in starting, it's a very rewarding hobby. So if you're interested, definitely get involved. First of all, you have the side of it where you're painting by yourself. It's a great opportunity to spend time with yourself and be creative. But then the social side that comes with it. Nearly all these games, they're meant to be played in a group. So whether with your local friends or you can meet like-minded people at your local gaming stores. But the combination of that time by yourself, doing something creative, and time spent with friends, it's quite nice. Not many hobbies you have that two sides. That said, there's a lot of support if you're ever feeling alone with the painting. So if you're just starting out, then get online. There's a lot of great YouTube tutorials for painting. There's Reddit. You can upload questions or photos and people will give you huge amounts of advice. It's a very supportive community. One word of caution I would say if you're getting into it is, what a common mistake people get into is they have all this enthusiasm to start and they go all out and they buy a full set of paints, full paintbrushes and a game, and then it doesn't actually work for everybody. So give it a try before you spend 200, 300 euros on all this stuff, because it's pretty hard to sell open bottles of paint. Nearly everyone just buys them new. So start off small, ease yourself into the project, and buy a small pack of minis or something, and then try painting that, see how you feel, and if you're still curious, and build up before you start throwing big money down. When choosing the colours for painting, everything has to work in a spectrum. So, for example, if you're painting the hair brown, you don't just have a single brown colour. You have the deep shades of brown, the base layer, and then the highlight browns. Now, acrylic paint dries very quickly. So, using a palette like this, which is called a wet palette, this is just a homemade version, but it helps keep the paint hydrated long enough that you can keep going back and add in colours into it to make it brighter or darker. And that way you can create that sort of nice layer of shades without having to reset your palette each time. If you're using oil paints, then you don't need to do this, but yes, so a wet palette. So it means there's actual water underneath the palette here.
Okay.
So it means you can actually leave this overnight and the paint will still be moist. Like this green paint here, that's from 6 days ago or something.
Okay.
If you just had a dry palette, it would be dry within half an hour. So it gives you a lot more flexibility for painting. If there's a lot of new painters, they start out and they don't know about using wet palettes, and it's a real eureka moment for a painter when they discover how much easier it is. So if you're a new painter watching this, then get a wet palette. This stage here is giving it the depth, so the colours can all be very flat, and the lines between the colours look quite unnatural for one colour just to end and another colour just to begin. And adding the ink creates a little bit of shade in between the layers, and it creates like a natural distancing of them. So this one's just a brown ink which goes nicely with metallics. You can use a sort of black shade which makes it look quite new. So if you want very fresh looking steel or something, or if you want it to look a little bit aged or worn in, this works particularly well, especially with darker metals. So you can see a comparison of on the bracelets here of before and after with the shading. So they both have the same base colour on their bracelets, and this guy here just has the base colour with no shading, and this guy here, he has the shading already put in.
The one on the right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.